metallic scent of blood and amniotic fluid. It carries this heavy vapor across the plains, broadcasting a singular message. In the wild, the smell of birth is not a miracle. It is an open invitation. The world is already hunting him. Hidden deep within a blinding yellow thicket, a newborn Thomson's gazelle takes his very first ragged breath. The air burning his lungs is thick with ancient dust and the pungent odor of trampled roots. He is entirely blind to the sheer scale of the danger surrounding him. At barely 6 pounds, he is impossibly small, lighter than a standard plastic gallon of milk you might grab from a grocery store refrigerator. Yet, he has been dropped directly into the center of the highest concentration of apex predators on the planet. His mother towers over his trembling frame. Her ears rotate like frantic radar dishes, dissecting the violent whispers of the wind. She scrapes her rough tongue against his damp fur. This is a desperate, calculated effort to erase the aromatic evidence of his arrival. But the greatest immediate danger is not the pride of lions sleeping in the distant acacia shade. It is the ticking clock of his own fragile body. He has exactly 15 minutes to figure out the complex mechanics of his own limbs. If he cannot lock his knees and rise from the dirt, he will not survive his first afternoon. Instinct, ancient and undeniable, screams through his underdeveloped nervous system. He gathers his impossibly long legs beneath his tiny frame. He pushes. His soft, pale hooves slip violently against the searing dust. He collapses. His chin strikes the blistering soil. His chest heaves uncontrollably. Every fiber in his fresh body begs him to close his eyes and surrender to the hot shadows. Listen to the savanna. It is never truly silent. The dry wind hisses, and high above the thermal updrafts, the blinding blue sky is not empty. The colossal shadow of a martial eagle sweeps silently across the golden sea. This winged titan possesses talons thick enough to crush a skull, and telescopic eyes designed to spot the slightest twitch in the grass from over a mile high. It begins a deliberate circle, waiting for the fawn to make a fatal mistake. Panic floods the newborn's veins. With a sudden, explosive thrust of muscle, he throws his weight forward again. He shakes violently, vibrating with the sheer effort of defying the earth. His front knees snap and lock into place. He sways wildly, completely off balance, but the hooves grip the soil. He is standing. He takes a clumsy step toward his mother, finding a brief, electric rush of energy in his first taste of warm milk. But in the Serengeti, triumph is an illusion that lasts only seconds. A standing mother is a visual lighthouse, drawing hungry eyes from miles around. To save his life, she must commit an act that looks like cruel abandonment. With a firm nudge of her muzzle, she forces him back down into the deepest tangle of brown stalks. He folds his legs and presses his head flat against the dirt. His mother turns her back. She walks out into the open plains, deliberately drawing the danger toward herself. He has found his trembling legs, but maternal protection is brutally temporary. The true nightmare of the wild begins now, because the shadows are stretching, the grass is rustling, and he is entirely, terrifyingly alone. A single black ant crawls across the damp corner of the fawn's oversized, unblinking eye. The heat bakes the cracked clay, radiating upward in shimmering waves that distort the horizon like a warped mirror. The temperature at the surface of the soil pushes past 110 degrees Fahrenheit. He does not blink. He does not twitch. His breathing is so incredibly shallow that his fragile ribcage barely shifts beneath his tawny coat. Zoom out from that unblinking eye, and the sheer terror of his reality becomes clear. He is surrounded by an ocean of bleached golden stalks. But this thicket is not a sanctuary. It is a shared hunting ground. Suddenly, the baked earth beneath his chin begins to vibrate. Crunch, snap. Heavy pads are crushing the brittle leaves, snapping dry stems with the weight of a calculated killer. The shockwaves ripple through the dirt, traveling straight into the delicate bones of the newborn's jaw. Just a few feet away, a massive female cheetah steps into view. A jagged, pale scar cuts violently across her left shoulder, the permanent signature of a desperate fight in her own youth. The metallic, sour scent of feral feline musk washes over the fawn. His tiny heart hammers against his chest, beating wildly against his ribs. This is the ultimate test. Every instinct wired into his developing brain screams at him to bolt, to scramble to his hooves and flee into the blinding light. But an ancient genetic command overrides his terror. It locks his muscles in absolute paralysis. He learns the first, most unforgiving law of the Serengeti. Panic in the thicket is an immediate death sentence. Invisibility is his only armor. The scarred cheetah pauses. Her golden eyes scan the blinding glare, completely unaware that her next meal is breathing just inches from her claws. She steps over him, her long tail brushing the tops of the grass, and melts away into the heat. He has survived this terrifying encounter. But the savanna has a long memory. This scarred phantom is a nightmare that will wait for him. Their paths will cross again when the years have taken their toll. The trial, however, has only just begun. He must play this agonizing game of statues for nearly 3 weeks. That is roughly 500 hours of suffocating stillness, a duration comparable to an entire winter break for an American high school student. For a creature built for motion, this is a lifetime of psychological torture. The math of the savanna is cold and absolute. A staggering 50% mortality rate looms over these nursery plains. Half of all fawns born here will simply vanish before their first month ends. It is the ultimate biological coin toss. Heads, you live to run. Tails, you feed the earth. He endures the terrifying nights, listening to the bone-chilling laughter of hyenas echoing in the pitch black. His mother returns only as a silent ghost in the twilight, offering a frantic, 2-minute window of rich milk before disappearing. Yet, beneath the safety of the brush, a rapid physical revolution is taking place. That thick milk is dense fuel. His wobbly bones thicken and calcify. Soft tissue binds into tightly coiled springs of muscle and tendon. He is growing stronger by the hour, outgrowing the shadows that have kept him alive. One morning, the familiar rumble of thousands of hooves vibrates through the earth. His mother approaches the thicket and issues a low, guttural click. The hiding phase is over. He rises from the dust. He steps into a sprawling city of hooves and horns, joining a massive herd that stretches out across a plain as flat and wide as a Midwestern highway. He learns the paranoid language of his kind, the sharp snort of a watchful female, the collective tightening of muscle right before fear strikes. The days of cowering in the dirt are permanently behind him. He must now face the relentless, sun-drenched arena of the open savanna, where absolute speed is the only currency that buys another dawn. A single, brittle acacia twig snaps beneath a padded paw. The sound is microscopic, sharp as a cracking knuckle, but the herd's collective nervous system registers it like a gunshot. The illusion of peace shatters in a fraction of a second. From the shimmering heat distortion on the horizon, painted shadows materialize. African wild dogs. They are not ambush hunters. They do not bother with the stealth of lions or the silent stalking of leopards. They are endurance killers, relying on the brutal arithmetic of stamina. And they have locked their dark, unblinking eyes on the young male. The golden sea of grass explodes. Panic rips through the herd like a high-voltage current. Thousands of hooves tear the baked clay apart. Blinding clouds of chalky white dust rise into the unforgiving sun, choking the air with the heavy, sour stench of fear and adrenaline. The chase begins. Instinct violently grabs the wheel of his brain. He runs. Dirt flies. Muscles contract. Hooves strike hard earth. Lungs burn. The world blurs into a chaotic smear of yellow and blue. He is no longer the trembling, 6-pound fawn cowering in the shadows. Months of grazing under the brutal equatorial sun have transformed him into a breathtaking biological machine of pure kinetic energy. His heart, now a massive hyperactive engine, pumps a river of oxygen-rich blood into legs that resemble tightly coiled steel cables. He accelerates with terrifying, explosive force, 30 miles per hour, 40. Within seconds, he hits a blistering top speed of 50 miles per hour. If he were sprinting down a quiet suburban American street, he would easily blow past a speeding car. But he does this barefoot, dodging hidden burrows and jagged rocks, powered by nothing but the desperate will to live. The friction of the wind screams in his ears. The scorching air tears at his flared nostrils. He tastes the sharp, metallic tang of his own exhaustion at the back of his throat. But the wild is a game of brutal mathematics, and sheer speed is a deadly trap. The painted dogs are the undisputed marathon champions of the savanna. They do not need to sprint faster than him. They only need to endure. They will simply run behind him at a steady, relentless pace, waiting for his hyperactive heart to give out. They wait for a single, fatal miscalculation. If he simply runs in a straight line, his speed will bleed away and he will die. He hears the wet, rhythmic snapping of jaws just inches from his right flank. He feels the foul heat of the predator's breath. He needs an edge. He must break their psychological momentum. Without breaking his 50-mile-per-hour stride, his body executes an ancient, gravity-defying maneuver. He launches all four hooves straight down like pistons. He rockets nearly 10 feet vertically into the blinding blue sky. He soars high enough to easily clear the rim of a regulation NBA basketball hoop. He hangs suspended in the air, his back arched, his legs perfectly stiff. He slams back down into the dust and immediately vaults again. This is stotting. It is a biological taunt. Every leap screams into the dust. Look at my explosive power. Look at how much energy I can afford to waste. Do not waste your breath. You cannot catch me. The message hits its mark. The lead dog falters, its rhythm broken by this staggering display of vitality. The pack calculates the immense caloric cost of chasing this impossible target. They wheel away, vanishing into the dust to find a weaker victim. He slows to a frantic trot. His sides heave, pulling deep, ragged gulps of oxygen. The dust settles, coating his tawny fur in a fine, triumphant gold. He has survived the crucible of velocity. Over the next few months, his body hardens into its final spectacular form. He reaches his adult weight of roughly 65 pounds of dense muscle. From his skull erupt two heavily ridged, wickedly curved black horns, the lethal crowns of adulthood. He has outrun death. He has conquered the shadows. But the savanna never allows its champions to rest. To claim his territory, to earn the right to reproduce, and to leave a lasting legacy on these brutal plains, he must pivot away from fleeing predators. He must prepare to face a violent, bone-crushing war against his own kind. Crack! The sharp, hollow sound of solid bone violently colliding with solid bone rings out like a rifle shot across the heat-warped plains. It is a terrifying, percussive sound that cuts straight through the relentless hiss of the dry wind. It is the sound of total war on a microscopic scale. Zoom out from the point of impact, and the true scale of his empire is revealed. He is no longer a fleeing shadow in the chaotic herd. The terrified fawn who once cowered in the yellow brush is gone. In his place stands a battle-hardened king of the short grass. At roughly 3 years of age, he has reached the absolute zenith of his physical existence. He weighs nearly 65 pounds, comparable to the weight of a large American golden retriever, but there is not an ounce of softness on him. He is a masterpiece of evolutionary engineering, packed with dense, coiled muscle. From his skull erupt two heavily ridged, wickedly curved black horns. They are lethal daggers nearly 15 inches long, roughly the length of a standard bowling pin. And right now, those horns are locked in a desperate, twisting duel with a massive rival male. He is not fighting for food. He is fighting for genetic immortality. He has claimed a prime mating territory. It is a strictly enforced perimeter roughly the exact size of a professional NFL football field. To a human eye, this is just a barren, featureless expanse of dry dirt and yellowed stubble. But to him, this specific stretch of land is the most valuable real estate on Earth. He marks the boundaries meticulously. He rubs a dark, tar-like waxy resin from the pre-orbital glands beneath his eyes onto the stiff stalks of grass. This chemical billboard screams a singular message into the wind. This earth belongs to me. Any female that crosses into this invisible border is his to court. But holding this throne requires a staggering, brutal defense. Dust explodes beneath their hooves as the two titans shove and twist. They throw their entire weight against each other, their thick necks straining under the terrifying pressure. Veins pulse wildly beneath their sweat-drenched coats. A single slip of the hoof would allow a horn to slide past the guard and puncture a lung. The blistering equatorial sun beats down at over 100 degrees Fahrenheit, baking the moisture right out of their laboring lungs. But the most terrifying danger in this arena is not the wicked curve of his rival's horns. Sitting just 50 yards away, completely motionless in the shimmering heat haze, a clan of spotted hyenas watches. They do not interrupt the duel. They simply wait. They know the brutal mathematics of the wild. A territorial king must burn a massive amount of calories every single day just to maintain his borders. He rarely sleeps. He barely has time to eat. He is literally starving his own body to ensure his bloodline survives. The hyenas know that a king pushed to total exhaustion is a king who can no longer run. Fear of those watching shadows drives him forward. With a sudden, explosive pivot of his neck, he leverages his hardened experience. He drops his shoulder just a fraction of an inch and drives his hind legs into the dirt. The challenger loses his footing. He stumbles violently backward, his balance shattered. Defeated, the young rival turns and flees into the blinding light. He stands victorious. His chest heaves, pulling ragged gasps of burning air. By holding this meticulously guarded kingdom, he earns the ultimate biological prize. He welcomes the wandering herds of females migrating through the short grass. He mates. After a gestation period of roughly 6 months, a new generation of fawns will drop into the golden hideaways, each one carrying his explosive speed. He has fulfilled his purpose. He is also a master architect of the plains. His relentless grazing keeps the devastating wildfires at bay, promoting fresh growth that sustains the entire ecosystem. He dominates the seasons. He survives the scorching droughts, pushing toward the absolute limit of his lifespan. But the savanna is an unrelenting accountant. One morning, as the long shadows of the late afternoon stretch across the cooling clay, the adrenaline finally drains from his racing heart. He takes a step toward a patch of fresh green shoots. He hesitates. A dull, unfamiliar ache ripples through his right hind leg. It is microscopic. A tiny, creeping stiffness deep within the cartilage of his knee joint. A subtle delay in a body built entirely for velocity. It is the first chilling whisper of the one ancient hunter no creature can ever outrun. Time has finally found him. The wind still screams the ancient command to run, but for the very first time in 12 brutal years, his legs simply refuse to answer. A heavy stiffness has settled deep into his joints. It is an immovable anchor of worn bone and thinning cartilage. The once mighty king of the short grass now feels the crushing weight of his own skeleton. To survive over 4,000 days on the Serengeti is a profound statistical miracle. In human terms, reaching this milestone is like living well past 100 years old. But the biological toll is absolute. His teeth, ground down to the gum line by a decade of chewing tough grass, can barely tear the softest foliage. He must chew longer, extracting fewer calories, slowly starving even when food is abundant. The dense muscle that once propelled him forward at freeway speeds has dissolved into fragile sinew. His majestic horns are splintered and blunt from years of violent clashes. He can no longer defend his football field-sized empire. Younger males have aggressively pushed him out to the fringes of the herd. He is wandering alone in the periphery, forced into the dangerous shadows. But the savanna does not offer a peaceful retirement. A runner without his explosive speed is just a ghost waiting to be collected. The dry stalks of the yellow grass part with a terrifyingly familiar rustle. Stepping out of the shimmering heat is a ghost from his infancy. It is the scarred female cheetah. She is ancient now, too. Her ribs show starkly beneath her faded coat. She is starving, driven to total desperation by her own failing strength. They are two fading legends of the plains, bound together by the unforgiving rules of the wild. The open loop of his life is finally closing. Instinct flares one last time. He turns to flee. He pushes his worn hooves against the baked clay, but there is no explosive leap. His 50-mile-per-hour velocity is permanently gone. He is now moving heavily, slower than a child pedaling a bicycle down a suburban sidewalk. His lungs burn with agonizing fire. The deafening thunder of a high-speed chase is replaced by the slow, rhythmic thud of her paws closing the final distance. When the weight of the aging predator brings him down into the golden dust, there is no frantic panic. The struggle is brief, quiet, and strangely dignified. It is not a violent tragedy. The savanna gave him life, and now it is simply calling in its debt. He rests his heavy head against the warm earth. The frantic pounding of his massive heart slowly begins to fade. The blinding light of the equatorial sun softens. The chaotic noise of the wild melts into a profound, peaceful silence. Zoom in on his dark, unblinking eye one last time. A single drop of moisture, a bead of early evening dew, slips from the sharp edge of a blade of grass above him. It falls, striking the baked clay with a microscopic hiss. With that tiny sound, his final breath releases. Death is never a true ending here. It is a beautiful, essential transformation. His magnificent body becomes a vital oasis. He will feed the ancient cheetah, buying her one more precious season. Scavengers and millions of tireless insects will claim the rest. When the torrential rains arrive, his bones will dissolve deep into the dark soil. From a fragile birth to the desperate hunger of youth. Through the mastery of speed, the absolute peak of power, the inevitable decline, and finally the return to the dust. Soon, that very grass will nourish a new fawn, taking its own trembling first steps into the blinding sun. Thank you for exploring the wild with Wildlife Realms. Subscribe for more journeys into the heart of nature.